Losing my brother saved my life. On October 19th, 2016, I lost my brother Corey to a heroin and fentanyl overdose. He was just 23, my little brother by about 2 years. Leading up to that, however, he had spent about 4 months drug-free at a treatment facility in eastern Massachusetts. Leading up to that, however, he had 2 mandated detoxes done by a judge after my parents brought him to court. They did this to save his life, to give him a future that he couldn't see for himself. At first, we were in denial. Addiction couldn't happen to us. It wasn't that bad. We could get through it. What happens in the family stays in the family, right? It wasn't until his behaviors became so severe because of how severe his addiction was that my parents realized they needed extra support. He drove while high and got into several car accidents. He stole from family members, selling family heirlooms at pawn shops to get money for drugs. He showed up at family parties, showing up to a 1-year-old's birthday party high, nodding out on the lawn, almost unconscious. When this started to happen, my parents realized they needed more support. So they brought him to court in front of a judge who made the accurate determination that Corey was a danger to himself due to the severity of his addiction. So he went to detox for the first time, came back after a few weeks, and things were okay for a while. He was a little bit better, but his addiction was so severe that the behavior soon returned, and for several months, my parents tried to deal with them again, but they were worse than ever. So in June 2016, they brought him back to the court for a second time, a judge again determining that he was a danger to himself. This time, however, my parents made the very difficult decision not to allow him back home afterwards. They had reached their breaking point. They finally realized that this was not something that could be constrained by love alone. It was out of their control. So after he was done with detox, he went to a transitional living facility where he spent the last 4 months of his life. He really liked it there. He got a job at a towing business, something that was different for him, and we talked almost daily, which again was something that wasn't happening while he was using. We talked about his future, which as a 23-year-old, he was still sort of figuring out, but to him, he was so enthralled and excited for a future that wasn't controlled by heroin. He never thought that that was going to be possible. And he was excited to be independent, to prove himself to my parents, to me, and to the world that he could get through this. In October 2016, I got married. And I was so happy and relieved that Corey was able to come back to our part of the state to celebrate with us. I didn't think it was going to happen. I really wasn't sure how long he was going to maintain his recovery for, but he did it. He made it. And at the wedding, all of my family members commented to me and to him at how good he looked. He had gained weight back. The color came back to his face. He was alive again. And everyone was so happy to see that. I thought that we had won what so many other families had lost. It was short-lived, however. On October 19th, I woke up getting ready for work, and I saw that I had several missed calls and text messages from my dad. It was really out of character for him to call me in the morning, so I was immediately quite anxious. I called him back. I said, "Dad, what's going on?" "Corey overdosed last night." In my mind, I'm thinking, he's at the hospital. We're gonna go to the hospital. Okay, so I ask him, "What hospital is he at?" "Sweetheart, he didn't make it." I couldn't breathe. The air rushed from my chest. I was in disbelief. I don't remember much from that morning, other than pacing my apartment, my newlywed husband standing by, absolutely unsure of what to do with himself because he too was in shock. And all I remember is yelling to the universe and the abyss, "My brother is dead," over and over and over again. I couldn't believe it. And I spent the next few weeks in the same blur, still trying to convince myself of my new reality. The tragic and sobering reality was that my family wasn't alone in this. In the same month that Corey passed away, over 180 other people in the state of Massachusetts also died from an opioid-related overdose, whether it was heroin, prescription pills, or fentanyl, which we're hearing more about now. In 2017 in Massachusetts, over 1,800 people also passed away from an opioid-related overdose, with more than 150 that are suspected but went unreported. Multiply that by all 50 states, you get over 42,000 people who passed away last year from an opioid-related overdose. So when we talk about the opioid crisis, the opioid epidemic, these are the numbers that we're talking about. 42,000, that leaves double, triple, quadruple, or more of the amount of us left behind. Brothers, sisters, parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, friends, communities, all of us impacted by this crisis. It begs the questions: how many parents will never get to walk their children down the aisle? How many siblings, such as myself, will never have the joy of knowing their sibling as they grow older together? The difficulty of this is that our society doesn't accept death. We don't talk about it. We don't handle it very well. That's exacerbated by the fact that addiction has a significant stigma attached to it. People sometimes think that it's a choice that can be canceled or changed by willpower alone, but that simply isn't the case. It's something we're all susceptible to, and addiction is a disease. But here's how it works in our brains chemically. When a person consumes an opioid, it floods our opioid receptors in our brain, and it mimics the natural occurring neurotransmitter dopamine, which leaves us feeling happy and joyous. And our bodies can't mimic it to this extent on their own. It's an incredibly pleasurable experience. So the brain becomes wired to do it over and over and over again. If someone takes this over a period of time and then suddenly stops, it can cause withdrawal symptoms, which I've heard is similar to the worst flu you could possibly imagine. Severe nausea, joint pain that leaves you bedbound, gastrointestinal problems, fatigue. So oftentimes, people will continue to use the substances just to stave off these symptoms. So this is how disease forms, something that we're all vulnerable to. It doesn't exclude based on race or class. Some people are more susceptible due to environment or family history, but it doesn't happen to just one person. So going through grief is a really unique type of sorrow. There are so many descriptions for it, but for me, it was like being dropped into a foreign country. I didn't know the language of grief. I had no one to guide me. I had never been through this before. I had thought of myself before this experience as a strong, independent young woman, and it felt like grief robbed me of that identity. I felt like I wasn't myself anymore, like I couldn't be myself. The part of me that stayed the same was that I was fueled to do something. I'm very much fueled by anxiety, and I like to get things done fast, and I'm not the type of person to sit around doing nothing if I'm upset. This was no different with grief. I had this energy, this desire to transform what I was feeling, to transform the pain that my family and the community at large was feeling, and turn it into something positive. What I didn't know at the time was that that's called something called post-traumatic growth. As described by the University of North Carolina, post-traumatic growth is a drastic positive change that can occur after a tragedy, a trauma, or an otherwise detrimental experience. It's mitigated by a few factors, such as strong interpersonal connections, having a really good support system, positive self-esteem, feeling really good about yourself, and emotion regulation, which is our ability to manage our feelings so that they don't overwhelm us. Post-traumatic growth can lead to people changing from their experience and moving forward, developing a sense of resiliency. So for me, that looked like applying to grad school and being accepted for a graduate degree in social work. It was something I'd wanted to do for a while, but I'd put it off because I thought I'd have more time. I thought that I didn't want to go back to school yet, but I felt so compelled to do this given what I had just experienced. Through my first year of school, this resilience and this growth pushed me forward, and also pushed me to apply for a competitive grant program that would specifically work with people in the behavioral health field. These are clients that could have been my brother in the worst and lowest parts of his addiction. I was placed at a behavioral health agency for this year, and I currently work with clients on an individual basis and also in a group setting. In groups, I often hear from clients about their families. They talk about their families wanting them to just stop using or to go back to who they were before they used. To the latter point, that's not possible for many of my clients. Some of them have used for their entire adult lives, for decades. They just don't know who they are without their substance of choice. And as we just discussed, we know that they just can't stop because willpower alone doesn't help. So in my work with them, I challenge them to see from their family's perspectives while also teaching them the communication skills and providing them the psychoeducation so that they can talk to their families about what they're going through. I also challenge them to grow from this experience as I grew from my own. I want to foster in them the same growth that I experienced. So now, I'm entering my final semester of grad school. Thank you. And I'm really excited to continue working with this population until I graduate. I do my best each day, but each day that looks different. But it's what Corey would have wanted. He did his best each day, despite a disease that waged a terrible, violent war against him. I said earlier that losing him saved my life. Through this process, it has fostered in me a hope I don't think I would have known otherwise. I have a deeper compassion, love for others, and I experience joy in a way that is different than before. The brain is a really magical thing. The same brain that is susceptible to addiction is the same brain that brings me up here, growing from this experience. And I have Corey to thank for that forever. Thank you.